Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 10 creatures that do take a bit of learning to actually know how to control. But just before we get into it, make sure to like and subscribe as it really does help out the channel. In at number 10 is the Basilisk. Now the Basilisk is definitely a very well-known creature in Ark and is definitely a creature that you should tame at some point if you can get over the massive hurdle of actually taming this creature. But the main thing is with the Basilisk is its turning circle is really rubbish, and it can take a lot of time to actually learn how to use the Basilisk effectively and how to move it around effectively. And even me, an Ark player who has played Ark for several years, still can't control the Basilisk properly because I haven't put enough time into actually practicing how to use this thing. That doesn't mean I don't use it though, it's just for its use of kind of moving around and getting around the place. I am really not that great at traversing the Basilisk around the maps. And also on top of all of that, in combat, it's great to know how to use this thing properly, as then you can quickly get out of any combat situation with absolute ease. In at number 9 is the Brontosaurus. Now you may think, well, the Bronto is a creature that you can simply ride and go around on. Yes, it is pretty basic to actually learn how to control this thing, but there still is a learning curve involved on actually maximizing the amount of berries you can harvest when using this thing, as your first run with the Bronto probably isn't going to be the greatest, as you're going to spend ages turning around and it's just going to be a very inefficient harvest. Yes, you may be getting all of those necessary resources, but still you may not be harvesting at the general speed that you should be or want to be harvesting at. And it definitely does take some time to learn how to control the Bronto properly to be able to harvest at that maximum efficiency and maximum speed, as the Bronto already has the resources at your disposal to give you all of the necessary materials that you need. You just need to learn how to use one effectively. In at number 8 is the Chalicotherium. Now you may think this thing, it's just a creature, you can just run around on it. Again, like the Bronto, this thing really doesn't have a use for me, and even if I did use it, I wouldn't struggle with controlling it. Well, there is one ability on this creature which really does make it somewhat difficult to control, and you'll definitely need to learn that skill progressively over an amount of time. Their ability where they can throw around rocks is the ability that I'm talking about, as it can be very difficult to aim those. And actually, this is a very useful ability from the Chalicotherium. So if you do have one, it is a useful skill to learn how to throw these rocks effectively, as it is a really good attack from this thing. Obviously, it does have great knockback on top of all of that as well, but if you do learn how to throw these rocks properly, it can be really efficient. But it definitely takes a lot of time to learn that in the first place, and again, I am not great at controlling this thing at all, but if you do have one, I really do urge you to learn how to throw those rocks with really great accuracy, sort of like a sniper. In at number 7 is the Astrodelphis. Now this creature is definitely a very recent addition to the Ark universe, coming out only 2 years ago in Genesis Part 2. And yes, it is still crazy to think Genesis Part 2 was 2 whole years ago. How much Ark has progressed since then is absolutely insane. Now the Astrodelphis does seem like a simple creature on paper, but to learn how to fly this thing efficiently and really well with great accuracy definitely takes some skill and some time compared to other traditional flyers, as this thing is quite taxing on the controls, and also doing all of the acrobatics can be extremely useful and efficient for navigating PvP battle dogfights in the air, and also just generally flying around the Ark map and doing what the Astrodelphis does best. And also, again, it will take some time to learn how to shoot the weapons on the Astrodelphis as well. And again, I haven't really spent much time with this thing, but I will learn fully at some point. And also another benefit on Genesis Part 2 is this thing is really great for getting hexagons, as several missions use the Astrodelphis, and there are many Astrodelphis race missions where you are tasked to fly this thing as efficiently as possible within a time limit. Definitely a taxing creature to learn, but one worth learning. In at number 6 is the Deinonychus. Now when you look at this creature, you'll probably think, I am going absolutely mental. Why is this creature hard to control? It is so easy, it's just the simple WASD on keyboard, and you just move the joystick on console. This creature really can't be that hard to control. And overall, the basics of this creature aren't too bad to learn. But with all of its wealth of abilities, this thing can actually be very difficult to control at a very high skill level. The amount of agility this creature has is really insane, and actually learning how to harness all of that agility can definitely take some time, and it is a show of really good skill if you fully know how to do this. If you didn't know already, the Deinonychus has several abilities which help it to kind of parkour across the map and really traverse really fast. Firstly, this thing doesn't even take full damage as well, which can be extremely useful, especially in those situations where you may miss a jump. But as you progressively get better, this won't be so much of an issue. Also, these are very fast moving creatures, which can make learning how to use one efficiently and effectively even more difficult, as learning how to simply glide across the walls as quickly and efficiently as possible can take some time, especially on Ark's very unnatural and glitchy rock surfaces. But it is still an insane skill that does require a lot of time and a lot of talent, but definitely one that every Ark player should learn at some point. In at number 5 is the Astrocetus. Now again, this creature is an extremely useful tame that you may think, again, why is this thing hard to control? And in essence, it actually isn't too bad to control, but this thing does take a lot of time to actually learn at a high skill level to traverse this thing across the map properly. Especially considering overall this is a largely slower creature, it can be really great to know how to traverse this thing with great speed and agility, as once you tame this thing you have all the tools available to you. But accessing that teleporting feature with maximum efficiency and turning and steering this thing with maximum efficiency can definitely be a challenge, as this creature is not the easiest to control and actually go where you want it to go, especially considering how big it is and how far away and how weird this thing actually is to control overall. In at number 4 is the Maywing. Now the Maywing is an essential creature that every Ark player does have access to as long as they have a map like Fjorda, as luckily they have been added when that map came out, which means these things are extremely more useful than they were when they were just available on Gen 2, as everyone has access to it. But what is so difficult about controlling the Maywing? It seems simple on paper, and when you see someone flying it, it seems like you could easily do it. And yes, you can still get up in the air with 0 seconds of actually using this thing and learning how to control it properly. But it is really a useful skill to learn how to do properly, especially on Gen 2, as this thing really works well on that map, and it is by far the fastest creature for travel in the game of Ark, by far, with no questions asked at all. The Maywing really is just the king of Ark travel, and it also is a pretty good berry gatherer, and it is great for raising creatures as well, which are all other reasons to tame this thing. And also it is a very basic tame overall, so it really isn't that difficult to get it. And especially on maps like Genesis Part 2, these things are really great for getting all of those hexagons in missions. In at number 3 is the Rock Drake. Now this is a fan favourite of many Ark players, and it really is a useful tame. But it definitely is a difficult one. But we're not here to talk about how you need to steal a rock drake egg to raise one today. We're talking about how difficult this thing is to control. And it definitely does have a learning curve. And still for me, I'm really not that great at controlling the rock drake. I am far better at gliding on a Maywing than I am a rock drake. but if I spent a lot more time practicing on one, I am sure I would be significantly better at flying on the Rock Drake, which is partly why the Rock Drake's gliding looks a lot more weedy than the Maywing. It also is because I'm in a flatter environment as well, as gliders don't really work too well in flatter environments. But with the Maywing, I always am fine in those flatter biomes. I don't know why, it's just I'm not very great at controlling the Rock Drake, and it definitely is something that does take skill and practice to learn. But I would definitely say practice on a map where there are a lot of high ceilings and walls, like a map like Arboration, or a map where there are just loads of things for the Rock Drake to grab onto. Crystal Isles is a sort of good shout if you go to the biome where I recorded the Maywing B-roll in this video, which I think is just called the Floating Islands, as there are a lot of things just to practice on and go around on. Obviously Arboration doesn't have hexagons, so the Rock Drake isn't going to help you get that, but they are extremely useful creatures for travelling and getting around, and great boss creatures as well, especially for choosing Rockwell on Arboration. In at number 2 is the gas bags. Now again, like many other creatures, this thing is accessible to everyone thanks to maps like Fjorda, and this thing is definitely a great gatherer of metal and many other resources, and it also is a really great tame if you aren't just a solo Ark player and you like to play it with a friend, as this thing doesn't require a saddle for you to ride it, but if you equip a saddle to it, you can have a friend tag along with you, something a lot better than just carrying someone around on an RG. And the gas bags is a lot more fun to use than the RG, especially when you know how to control this thing properly. And by far, this is the creature which I control the worst out of every single Ark tame, but I would still consider the tame in number 1 to be a little bit more difficult to learn how to control, as there are a few more steps. Whereas this thing is simply you shoot gas and you kind of point in the direction where you want to go, and you'll kind of go in that direction. At the start, you'll kind of be a bit out of control like I am in this B-roll here, and you'll be going up and around and all over the place, and it'll be greatly inefficient. But when you do learn how to actually use one of these things, it is extremely fun to ride around on these things, as I have experienced as a friend of mine is really good at controlling this thing, and it is really nice to have one of these things zip across the map really fast so we can gather some metal and head back home. If only I actually had the skill to do that instead of just falling to the ground after I run out of loads of gas and then end up getting killed by loads of wyverns. But if you do end up falling at some point because you didn't stamina manage and go low to the ground when your oxygen, I should really say, is low because it uses oxygen instead of stamina, always make sure to dismount just before you hit the ground, and then your creature will take no damage. A hack that I hope is really in Ark 2, but I doubt the devs would actually put it in. And finally, in at number 1 is the Blood Stalker. Now, in my opinion, the Blood Stalker is the hardest creature to control in Ark, but definitely one that really should be learned at some point, and one that I'm a bit mediocre with, as I did spend a lot of time practicing with it when Gen 1 came out, but I still haven't practiced it that much since the Maywing came out in Genesis Part 2, as that is my main travel creature that I use in Ark. I no longer really use the Bloodstalker anymore, but that doesn't mean you should not use the Bloodstalker. The Bloodstalker is great for traversing the oceans as well, as it is a great swimmer. It's great for skimming across large bodies of water, as this thing can float on the top of water, and this thing really can rip across the map if you know how to control this thing effectively. And again, like the Rock Drake, you will need a map with a lot of high things that the Bloodstalker can grab onto. But luckily, the Bloodstalker can grab onto a wealth of things that the Rock Drake can't, like trees, for example, but smaller trees at that. The Rock Drake can definitely do redwood trees, but the Bloodstalker can definitely grab onto a wealth of other resources apart from what the Rock Drake can. And really, if you do have access to the Bloodstalker, I urge you to learn how to fly one of these things. At first, you'll probably get really angry with yourself, and you'll just think you're the most rubbish Bloodstalker flyer in the world, if you can even call it flying. But when you do learn, you'll be very thankful that you did, as it is great for many missions on Genesis Part 1, and it is just a really useful creature with a wealth of abilities in Ark, and it is a great creature to use and know how to execute around properly. But anyway, that is the end of today's video. Also, I would like to know what creatures you struggle to control, and actually what creatures you found really hard to control and now you control really well, as I would really like to know.